this is not just an ecological and environmental imperative, but also an economic one when you consider the huge economic impact that coastal tourism has on our Southern California economy. And I think the main takeaway for me was really just a reminder that the only foolproof way to prevent these spills from occurring is by ending offshore drilling activity off our Southern California coast altogether.
Orange County Democratic Congressman Mike Levin speaking to KCRW earlier today. Before this oil spill, he had introduced legislation in the House that would prohibit new oil and natural gas drilling activity off the coast of Southern California. As for what caused this disaster, 144,000 gallons of crude oil swirling around our water, killing marine life and polluting the coastline. Well, the thought now is that a shipping tanker's anchor may have pierced the pipeline. Rachel Becker joins me now. She's an environment reporter for Cal Matters, and she's been covering this oil spill. Welcome. Well, how credible is that idea that it was an anchor that pierced the pipeline?
Thanks for inviting me. You know, it's one of the possibilities being discussed, and at a press briefing yesterday, Amplify Energy CEO Martin Wilshire said, you know, it's one of the distinct possibilities. And the Coast Guard captain of the port, Rebecca Orr, said that, you know, a precise look at where the vessels
and everybody knows now about the
were
whole
relative
supply
to
chain
the
problem
pipeline
and all
is
of
an
those
assessment that's pending.
ships
this is something that
docked
is
outside
being looked into.
the ports down there. So there are just more ships there, and they need a place to drop anchor, right?
At the presser yesterday, the Coast Guard spokesperson did gesture behind her.
Well, now there are questions of who knew what
there.
when. When did state authorities find out about this spill? Do you have a timeline now?
That's really an ongoing question of who knew what when. It's something that came up a lot in questions to officials yesterday. The Coast Guard
on Saturday
said in its press materials and that it was 9:10 a.m. when they received notification. However, there was an article on Saturday, and
and
there was
so
an article in the OC
that,
Register
are they looking into whether it was
that
the
indicated
state
that
authorities that didn't
reports
alert the public,
night.
or the company didn't alert the state authorities in time? We don't know that yet.
That's really a major question, is who dropped the ball. Yesterday, Amplify Energy CEO Martin Wilshire
at this point,
said
what's
that
happening with the cleanup?
while there
was
is
a big storm
equipment
yesterday,
that can detect a leak, they had
things,
no indication that there was a leak.
Where are we today on this?
The cleanup, there are multiple components to the cleanup. There's the cleanup on the open water, which is involving, ships going out with booms to kind of corral the oil that then gets scooped up in skimmers and removed. And there have been several thousand gallons, approximately 4,000 gallons of oil that have been recovered that way. That's really a drop in the bucket of what could have been released from this spill. There are also booms being deployed at really sensitive areas along the coast, such as wetlands, to try and prevent the oil from getting in and damaging them, including the Talbert Marsh, which is this small, painstakingly restored wetland in the Huntington Beach area. And this is actually the second time it's been oiled in its short history. But even with the boom and a berm, there has been some oil that crept in. And wetlands are really one of the most difficult ecosystems to clean up, because the oil can get stuck in there. They're so fragile. And the cleanup process with people tramping in and trying to mop up the oil can actually do damage as well. So then you have to balance the cleanup and the contamination risks. On beaches, we haven't heard much from officials yet about what the beach cleanup is looking like. But beach cleanup of but there is oil contamination of the beaches with kind of sticky oil globules and patties mixing into the sand. And beach cleanup can involve, just shoveling the oil away. It can involve using absorbent materials like special sponges that soak up the oil specifically. And it can also involve dispersal
All right, Rachel,
agents.
thank you so much for the update.
Detergents like soap that can break up the oil and make
My pleasure. That's Rachel Becker
and
from Cal Matters. I want to zoom out a little bit and bring in Charles Lester now. He is director of the Ocean and Coastal Policy Center in the Marine Science Institute at UC Santa Barbara. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of Santa Barbara, it was the big oil spill there more than 50 years ago that really supercharged the modern environmental movement and got a ban on new offshore leases on the part of the state, right?
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but it is more than 50 years since that spill, which, of course, sent about 3 million gallons of oil into the environment. And as you say, was one of the reasons we have an environmental movement. And since then, offshore oil and those kinds of concerns about oil spills have been front and center in California.
Right. And so does the state have any more? From what I understand, after that, they banned all new oil leasing off the coast of California. But but this particular one was in federal waters. So are most of the drilling operations off the coast of California federally approved?
Now they are. I mean, as you say, we had offshore oil and onshore oil in California for quite some time. In fact, the progression was from the onshore into the offshore as technology allowed us to move out into the water. But since that spill, there's been pushback at the state level and essentially no significant new leasing or entitlements in state waters, which go out to 3 miles. But beyond 3 miles are federal waters, and there was quite a bit of federal leasing activity in the 1960s and 70s and into the early 80s, which has resulted in currently around 23 platforms that are still out there in federal waters, including the ones involved in the current spill. Of course, it's important to understand that these platforms are part of a infrastructure network. So the platforms themselves are just the locations where the drilling occurs, bringing the oil up, but then that oil needs to be brought to shore for processing. And a lot of that is done by pipeline. So in this case, the speculation is it was that pipeline running from a processing platform, which was collecting oil from other production platforms and then sending that oil to shore for further processing. It's that pipeline that has perhaps resulted in this spill.
Right. So there are now calls to limit or end oil drilling off the California coast. How feasible is that to end this?
Well, that's a really great question. I mean, of course, the calls to end offshore oil drilling in California are not new and probably originated back with the Santa Barbara spill. And ever since then, there's been political pressure to not have new offshore oil development. And the public in California has consistently been against new offshore oil development. So through the early 1980s, under the Reagan administration, we had a very controversial Secretary of Interior who pressed for more offshore oil development in federal waters in California. We pushed back in this state and through a variety of mechanisms, essentially held the line on any new significant leasing after the mid-1980s. And that said, there are these existing platforms that have entitlements for producing oil from their locations, mostly in the Santa Barbara Channel, but also up towards just north of the channel and also in the Long Beach area as here. So those entitlements all are, based on existing governmental approvals and understandings of how much oil might be produced from a particular area. And all those need to be looked at very carefully in terms of the phasing of those production locations out. Now, they also have a natural life, quote unquote, of their own, which is, how much oil can economically be taken out of a certain basin. And that's really a function of the basin itself and the geological characteristics of that, as well as the economics of oil. So there are ways we can influence how much oil we continue to produce from our offshore areas as well as onshore. And so obviously that highlights demand as a critical factor.
Right.
What's the demand for oil?
Charles Lester from UC Santa Barbara, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's only Tuesday, and already Facebook has had pretty much its worst week ever. Today, Frances Haugen, a former product manager for Facebook, now whistleblower, testified before a Senate committee arguing that Facebook, which also owns Instagram and WhatsApp, needs to be regulated.
As long as Facebook is operating in the shadows, hiding its research from public scrutiny, it is unaccountable. Until the incentives change, Facebook will not change. Left alone, Facebook will continue to make choices that go against the common good.
Haugen revealed in a 60 Minutes interview on Sunday that she secretly copied tens of thousands of documents before leaving Facebook and handed them over to federal law enforcement officials, members of Congress, and the Wall Street Journal. Those documents detail how Facebook's algorithm actively boosts posts that make users angry because it spurs engagement and therefore ad dollars.
The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart and causing ethnic violence around the world.
And as if all that wasn't bad enough, all of Facebook's apps also went down for hours yesterday. Joining us to talk about Facebook's very rough week and whether it can recover is Mike Isaac, technology correspondent for the New York Times. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you. All right, so Frances Haugen, as we said, is a former Facebook employee. Tell us more about who she is and why she decided to come forward and testify.
Yeah, so Ms. Haugen is not a well-known name in the tech industry, but she did have, a reputation among some of her colleagues that I've talked to who worked at Pinterest or former Facebook colleagues of being someone who had integrity and was pretty forthcoming and honest in their dealings inside of these companies. And so she was a product manager inside of Facebook and had done similar work at Pinterest for some time, basically working on integrity and some of the dangerous things that happen across these social platforms. She was at Facebook for about 2 years and then ended up leaving after feeling dissatisfied with the inability for Facebook to publish research externally outside of the company on some of the harms that the platform does to its users. Ultimately, she decided to take a lot of that information with her in the form of photograph screenshots and then share them with the Journal and Congress. And that's she's had a pretty humongous impact so far, at least for the past 3 weeks.
Right. And is this the moment? I mean, this is one area where it seems Congress can reach some kind of agreement. It seems like members on both sides of the aisle don't like Facebook. Is this the moment where they come together and say, okay, we're going to regulate?
I've been trying to figure that out because if you remember, just like 3 years ago, we went through this with Cambridge Analytica, Facebook being very cavalier about people's data and just sort of having a laissez-faire approach to privacy and protecting consumer rights around data. There were a number of hearings. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg both testified on the Hill, and no bills have substantively sort of made it through Congress and been passed that rein in the company or any other big tech companies. So I'm skeptical that it will lead to immediate change. That said, it is getting a larger dialogue going among folks in the industry, and I'm curious if it leads to other hearings. The folks on Capitol Hill said that they wanted to have even more hearings with Ms. Haugen. So who knows?
Right. And I guess you're watching and monitoring the hearing. Is she getting sympathetic questions from both sides?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, usually you get very partisan questions, sometimes less pointed and more sort of rambling or confusing questions. Senators or congressmen and women grandstanding. And that was just not the case in this hearing. It was basically very even-handed, very informed, very sort of much more informed than previous years where it seemed like our elected representatives did not have a handle on it. And Ms. Hagan presented as a very competent and intelligent and insightful witness, which is not always the case.
Yeah. So she also handed over these documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission. What could they do conceivably to Facebook?
That's right. I think the SEC angle here, essentially their argument is Facebook has a fiduciary duty to not lie to its investors. And if Mark Zuckerberg or any other executives have essentially committed lies under oath, whether in Congress or in disclosures to the SEC, that can be damaging. That could be potentially criminal in terms of liability. I don't know if that argument's going to work. I don't know how the SEC has sort of accepted this. The documents are just coming in to the SEC over the past few days. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I think it's just another method of attack in case regulation doesn't occur. There's a different agency that can sort of step in and intervene.
So despite the fact that Facebook is just a giant, right? It's got nearly 3 billion users worldwide. Your colleague Kevin Roose has written that this is actually a picture of a company that is in decline, that its best days are behind it, and that there's internal research saying daily use will drop by about 43% in, I don't know, about a year and a half. I'm wondering what you make of that.
I think Kevin was right, and it's very telling on how a lot of the research basically said, look, we're losing young people to companies like TikTok, to companies like YouTube, to companies like Snap. And we don't know what the next big social app is going to be for the next generation of social media users. Really, with each subsequent generation, people just sort of cycle through these apps. Facebook is largely seen now as the social network for boomers, and young folks are not really super into it. And Instagram is going to have dominance among young people for only so long until the next thing comes around. So I really think Facebook, and particularly Mark Zuckerberg, recognize that you can't be on top forever, but they want to try as long as they can. And that's what a lot of this research is aimed at keeping their dominance for as long as possible.
So it seemed like more than coincidence that right after the 60 Minutes interview on Sunday, yesterday, Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, shut down for hours. I mean, obviously, we don't know if there was a link there, but what happened?
So it was a total scramble yesterday to figure out what the heck was going on. People inside of the company didn't know. And part of that was because all of their apps and internal tools were shut down. One person called it a snow day at Facebook. They couldn't get into some of the rooms with the key cards that they use to get into different offices or data centers. Basically, someone pushed a change to their code that spread quickly, as it does when they make server changes. But it was essentially a system breaking change that took down the entire thing. What they ultimately did is get into their server rooms, a data center in Santa Clara, rolled a previous version of Facebook back, and slowly the apps came back to life.
I mean, some conspiracy-minded people were thinking they did this on purpose to show the world, well, this is what it's like if we go down, so watch out.
Yeah, I know. I heard a lot of that the other day. I think there's not necessarily evidence to suggest that, but it is an attractive theory.
Mike Isaac, tech correspondent for the New York Times. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Afghanistan. We'll talk to a woman here who's trying to help with her tiny nonprofit. That's next on Press Play.
This season on Bodies, we bring you 6 new episodes that investigate the forces outside of us and unearth the mysteries within.
It was something that I just buried because the contradiction was too painful.
Stories about rejecting normal.
I don't understand this desire to be like y'all.
And what happens when we come together. Bodies Podcast, Season 3 from KCRW, coming this fall. Subscribe now.
This is Press Play on KCRW. I'm Madeline Brand. It's been about 7 weeks since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. And by the day, the country is deteriorating. More people are now experiencing hunger and poverty. People who are now out of work or not receiving the aid they did before the Taliban takeover. During the occupation, the Afghan government was mainly supported by international aid. Now, much of that has vanished. Roughly 2,000 healthcare clinics in the country have closed. Nearly all of them were run by NGOs. The country is also in a severe drought, and that's had a big impact on food production. The International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent is warning of a major humanitarian crisis. Here to talk about this is Dr. Mina Syed. She's a surgeon here in Santa Monica and founder of a tiny NGO. It's called Wellness Worldwide, and it provides food and medical care to people in Afghanistan. Welcome to Press Play.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. So you are from Afghanistan originally. You came here as a child. And so you have connections there on the ground. What are you hearing about the conditions there now?
Starvation has already begun. Children are dying of malnutrition. Last week, 17 children died in an area named Ghor. People reach out to our group from many provinces. They call my head of operations, and they are essentially begging him to come to their province and their districts to see what the situation is on the ground and to see what he can do to help. We've got these calls, particularly heightened in the last 2 weeks from areas like Kunduz, Nuristan, Kunar, and several other provinces.
And these are people who did not experience hunger or this kind of deprivation before the Taliban takeover?
No, I'm going to clarify that. So even before the Taliban takeover, because of the 42 years of war and the drought and the rampant corruption in the prior regime, there was a significant food insecurity. And after the Taliban takeover, with the events that you alluded to, that food insecurity has exponentially increased.
And pinpoint what exactly the problem is. Is it that there isn't enough food or the food's not getting to them? What is causing this?
So there is food domestically in the country right now, and the trade routes between Iran and Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan, all of those trade routes are currently open. Merchants inside Afghanistan do have the food, but it belongs to the merchants, and people don't have the money to buy the food.
And there isn't any large NGO presence in the country anymore to deliver food aid.
Correct. And that's why our small organization has been inundated and overwhelmed with requests for help.
You have 13 people, right? Volunteers. That's it?
Correct. That's mostly correct. Between here and in Afghanistan, we have 13 volunteers, but we have access to at least 100 men on the ground for the food distributions. But our core people is about 13. Yeah.
So how does it work? How do you organize a food delivery from here?
The way it works is, for example, 2 days ago on Sunday, we provided food for 2,000 people in an area called Kunduz in the northern Afghanistan. Our team works with local leaders. These local leaders are people who represent their community. They are not Taliban. They're local tribal elders and religious leaders. We consult with them to identify the people who are most in need of aid. We identified 300 families, or approximately 2,000 people. Like I said before, there is food in the country. And the issue is that the banks are closed. So our workaround is that merchants in Afghanistan also have accounts in either Dubai or even America. So we pay for the food by putting it into the Dubai or American accounts, and then they release the food on the ground to my group in Afghanistan.
Have the prices gone up?
Significantly. So last year when we had our food aid distribution, It cost about 25 cents per person per day to feed. Now it's about 40 cents per person per day. Almost double.
It's almost double, yeah. So how are you paying for that?
We do this through crowdfunding. We use GoFundMe campaigns. We reach out to the community using Instagram, Facebook, and our website.
Well, given that we are being warned of a major humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, why aren't bigger organizations getting involved?
I think the statements they have made is that there are concerns for security, and that is something that we as our organization have not experienced in the last month and a half since the Taliban have taken over.
So they're afraid of the Taliban at security checkpoints, what have you, either
Correct.
Arresting, harassing, extorting their workers.
Yes, and the security situation overall, in terms of a worry for instability in general. And there's a lack of trust between the Taliban and the larger organizations and vice versa. So I think that our organization has been able to travel freely throughout the country and provide our aid. So if you look at us as a microcosm, I think that those fears in our experience are unfounded.
But you are using locals, you yourself are Afghan, and you understand the culture. So I guess that is a big advantage. Have you had any problems at all with the Taliban?
So far, our work has been uninterrupted by them. When we work in an area, we first go and obtain their permission. There are local Taliban authorities who monitor NGO activity. And as long as we get their permission, we're able to go forward. So since we've started, we have not had any problems with them per se.
What are you expecting as winter approaches? What do you think is going to happen in Afghanistan when it comes to, people needing food and shelter and healthcare?
So, the popular term that everybody uses is winter is coming from Game of Thrones. And unfortunately, it's terrifying, more terrifying than fiction, because that's exactly what's happening now. Winter is very cold in Afghanistan. People have no fuel to heat their homes. If you compound that with malnutrition, then there will be a large loss of life.
Mm. What needs to happen, do you think, on a larger scale?
So this is not a natural disaster. It's a man-made disaster. So I think the larger humanitarian organizations need to address the food crisis immediately. The US and the international community must find a way, maybe through trust funds, to unfreeze the Afghan state money so that ordinary people can start earning a living again.
I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, and best of luck to you.
Thank you for having me.
That's Dr. Amina Syed. She's a surgeon here in Santa Monica and founder of the small NGO Wellness Worldwide. Coming up, a new Star Trek exhibition at the Skirball tells the story of some of the social taboos the first series explored, such as an interracial kiss between Lieutenant Uhura and Captain Kirk.
The story goes that William Shatner read the script and he said, oh, no, if anyone gets to kiss Nichelle Nichols, it's going to be me.
That's next on Press Play. This is Press Play on KCRW. I'm Madeline Brand. It's Tuesday, so that means, well, you know what that means. It's time for TV on the radio.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Star Trek. That is the theme from the original series, which debuted in 1966. It only ran for 3 seasons. Since then, it gave birth to 9 spin-off shows and more than a dozen movies. The franchise is constantly being reimagined. What was it that creator Gene Roddenberry stumbled upon that captured so many generations of fans? Well, in a new exhibition, the Skirball Center examines what made Star Trek an iconic piece of TV history. And joining me to talk about this is curator at the Skirball, Laura Mart. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Madeline.
Well, why did you choose to do this, to look into Star Trek at the Skirball?
So the Skirball, as some of your listeners may be familiar, is a Jewish institution, but we strive to present programming that connects with Jewish values that are shared more broadly. And these are values of things like inclusion, justice, optimism, discovery, and hope. And those themes are really at the core of Star Trek. There's a lot of overlap between our values and the values that Star Trek has promoted for over 55 years.
Was Gene Roddenberry Jewish?
No.
Okay, just checking.
But Leonard Nimoy was Jewish. William Shatner is Jewish. And many of the writers and contributors, people behind the scenes, on and off screen, also were people of Jewish heritage.
Why do you think this has, I said there are all these spin-offs and movies. Amazon has a cartoon, a Star Trek cartoon. Why the enduring fascination, do you think?
People love Star Trek because they see themselves in Star Trek. Star Trek was one of the first shows to really present an inclusive cast. Nichelle Nichols was the first Black woman in a leadership role on television. You had George Takei as Lieutenant Sulu, who is a Japanese American on screen at a time when, there was still a lot of leftover kind of anti-Asian sentiment after World War II. You had a Russian on screen during the Cold War. So there was that kind of like the inclusion of earthly, different groups from Earth who were at the time not necessarily getting along super well. But you also had people with different ways of operating, right? So you had like a character like Spock, for instance, where Spock is a cerebral, logical person.
Your move, Captain.
We should have intercepted by now. The bridge said they'd call.
I'll have you checkmated your next move.
Have I ever mentioned you play a very irritating game of chess, Mr. Spock?
Irritating? Ah, yes. One of your Earth emotions.
There hadn't really been a lot of characters like that. Somebody who is mysterious, level-headed, calm, collected, as really a hero. And I think a lot of people felt that, the range of characters on Star Trek represented themselves better. They identified with these characters. And then also throughout the different movies, series, there's always been an element of wonder, but also of hope, of optimism. And so it's especially apparent in the original series, right? We're looking at the 1960s. This is a time when the US was going through a very difficult, very polarized time, right? The civil rights movement, you had the Vietnam War, which really divided the country. But at the same time, you had really spectacular innovation in the realm of space exploration. And so there was this fascination with technology, but also this, like, a lot of pessimism and fear. There was also the Cold War, so you had the daily fear of nuclear annihilation on top of all of that. And so Star Trek gave people something to be hopeful about for the future, right? Here you had people having overcome some pretty serious challenges, war and conflict, and finally people on Earth had gotten their act together and created this utopian society. They'd made contact with other interplanetary cultures and formed alliances. And now, what you see on Star Trek is the 5-year mission of the Enterprise exploring strange new worlds. And so they can go out on this peaceful diplomatic mission together.
Right. And so you had people from, I mean, it was like a United Nations on board the Enterprise. You had people from all over the place. You had George Takei. You had the Russian, I forgot the name of that actor. You also had Nichelle Nichols as Uhura. And I want to play a clip of tape of something that happens between her and Captain Kirk. And this is something that had never happened or been seen on television before. Well, an interracial kiss.
I'm so frightened, Captain. I'm so very frightened.
It's very interesting, the first interracial kiss on television. It never occurred to us that this was a historical event.
So there she is, Nichelle Nichols, talking about that in hindsight, this kissing scene. It's kind of shocking that that had never happened, but I guess there we were in the mid-1960s. What did you learn about that particular scene and how groundbreaking it was?
It's interesting that, as Nichelle Nichols says in that clip, that they didn't realize how groundbreaking that was. This was a moment when interracial marriage was really at the forefront, and interracial relationships were really at the forefront of national consciousness. This is about the time that Loving versus Virginia, that case happens. This is still a really touchy subject for many Americans. And so to have it portrayed on network television, many television stations in the South threatened not to show Star Trek, or actually didn't show Star Trek because of the way that it depicted interracial relationships and the way that it depicted people like an integrated cast on television. Like even the kiss notwithstanding, even the mere presence of Lieutenant Uhura as the communications officer on the bridge, that in itself was groundbreaking, but also in some corners controversial.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I understand that that kiss was supposed to have taken place between Uhura and Spock.
That's right.
How did Captain Kirk get involved?
The story goes that William Shatner read the script and he said, "Oh, no, if anyone gets to kiss Nichelle Nichols, it's going to be me. I mean, if anyone kisses Lieutenant Uhura, it's going to be Captain Kirk." So he took it over. It was supposed to be Spock, and he put himself in there instead.
Well, he is the captain, after all. Speaking of, you have the captain's chair in the exhibition, right, and Spock's tunic from one of the movies. And then you also have the big console, the centerpiece of the set. And tell us about that.
I just love that piece. And I love it because you can see the production quality of a 1960s television show, right? They didn't have HD. This thing is made out of plywood. The paint is, the paint wasn't originally chipped, but now the paint is a little chipped. It's been loved. But what I think is so fascinating about it is the story that it tells. And the story goes something like this. Back in the 60s, there wasn't really this secondary industry market for props and costumes from TV. So once things were used on a show and the show wrapped, the props would be, turned into props for other things, or maybe discarded, or maybe, taken home by people. And this was one of the things that was taken home. Eventually, it made its way through various hands. I think at one point they put these props in like Vegas hotels or something. So eventually it went up for auction, and it was bought by a very, very diehard fan who had to have it. And he worked with this amazing team of people who really knew their Star Trek design to restore the console to its original condition. And this even included going so far as to carefully watch episodes of the original series and noted the timing of each light's blink pattern and programmed it all to blink in just that correct manner. And I think that really says a lot about how passionate Star Trek fans are about what they love, right? Star Trek is really I don't want to use the word obsession, but in some cases it might rise to that level. That there's
That's okay. I think they would call themselves
detail.
obsessives.
Some people will admit to it.
Yeah.
Some people will admit to it. There's really an attention to detail, a love, and a care that Star Trek fans have.
Well, I'm sure you're going to attract many of them to the exhibition because fans can't get enough of Star Trek, it seems.
Yeah, we hope so. We're very excited to welcome them.
Laura Mark, curator at the Skirball Cultural Center, Star Trek Exploring New Worlds opens October 7th. Thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
Coming up, can the Dodgers repeat last year's World Series victory? They are one game away from the playoffs. The Sklar brothers will be here to talk about that next on Press Play. This is Press Play on KCRW. I'm Madeline Brand.
The sound of a cheering crowd tells it all.
It is October, which means the weather is getting cooler. Pumpkin spice is in everything. And the baseball playoffs are about to begin. The Dodgers play the St. Louis Cardinals tomorrow in a wild card game. If they win, they move on. If they lose, well, at least there's football. The Chargers and Rams are both off to good starts to their seasons. Here to talk about it all are the Sklar brothers, Randy and Jason Sklar. Hi, guys.
Hi, Madeline.
Ooh, in stereo. All right, you both are from St. Louis. You're Cardinals fans, so don't at them, you guys.
It's exciting.
So,
we're not going to get mad at you. We won't get mad. Jay, you can explain it. Jay's going to the game. Jay will be at the game.
I will be there tomorrow in my proud Cardinals red.
Wow.
But I do think it's a tall.
You are bold. You are a brave man.
I'm going to use my 12-year-old son as a human shield. Okay.
So here's my question. So the Dodgers are doing really, really well this season.
Yeah.
They have the second best record. Why are they in a do or die wild card scenario?
Well, so what happened was that unfortunately the Dodgers' biggest rival, the San Francisco Giants, who don't nearly have as high of a payroll, they finished one game ahead of the Dodgers. And by the way, the Dodgers had an amazing year. They won 106 games this year. Too bad that the Giants won 107. So now the Dodgers are fighting for their life in a one-game play-in game, the wild card game, against the hottest team in baseball right now, the Cardinals, who won 17 games in a row in September, a team that was picked with I think a 2% chance to make the playoffs at the beginning of September. But now the Cardinals are hot. The Dodgers have to play the Cardinals, a team that through the last couple decades has kind of had their number in the postseason. And this is a big test for the Dodgers because over a 7-game series, I think most analysts and experts would say Dodgers all the way. But in one game, anything can happen. One weird hit, one error, one out, one pitcher comes in hot. And Randy will tell you about the Cardinals pitcher because they're starting their oldest pitcher on their staff.
Yeah, Adam Wainwright is the Cardinals pitcher. He's 40 years old. It looked like he might end. He's had 2 season-ending Tommy John surgeries in his career. He's a very accomplished pitcher and with a great postseason sort of pedigree. He had one of his best pitching seasons. He was only second in wins in the entire league to Urias, the Dodger pitcher. Now, the Dodgers pitching is set up, even though Clayton Kershaw went on the injured list, the Dodgers pitching, their 1, 2, and 3 pitchers I would never want to face these teams in a 7-game series. Urias had 20 wins this season. Max Scherzer, who they acquired down the stretch, maybe the best acquisition in the late season acquisition ever. He's 15-4, and Walker Buehler is 16-4. These are unbelievable pitchers with over 200 strikeouts in the year, ERAs under about 2.5. They're just incredible. So you wouldn't want to face them. And Max Scherzer is facing, the St. Louis Cardinals. Max Scherzer, who grew up in St. Louis. An interesting tidbit. He went to the same school district that we went to, and Jason and I and Max Scherzer, the 3 of us, went into the Parkway School District Hall of Fame the same year.
I think he thinks about that all the time.
What were you doing in the Hall of Fame?
Oh,
Comedy,
wow.
Madeline.
That hurts.
Jeez,
Come on,
wow.
Madeline.
Shots fired.
For comedy.
Inquiring
Jeez.
minds want to
Okay,
know.
well, we're talented people. Oh my God! Now
You
this
are
is just
talented
devolving.
people, but you're
this
not
is
baseball
devolving.
players. You're
No.
No,
you have
this
your
is like
talents lie elsewhere.
it's the general Hall of Fame. It wasn't the Sports Hall of Fame. It was the
okay.
general Parkway Hall. I should have been more
Gotcha.
specific. The Parkway Hall of Fame.
Okay, well, speaking of Maxes, people named Max, let's talk about for the Dodgers first baseman Max Muncy. He is out, right? He won't be in the game tomorrow, so that's a big loss because he's a big home run hitter. They're best,
and
right?
weird. He has the most home runs on the Dodgers this year. I believe 35 or 36 home runs and almost 100 RBIs in the season. Led the team in both. He's got a lot of he was great in the postseason last year. Hit a lot of home runs, a lot of RBIs. He's a guy who can get it done in the postseason and freak play. Just the catcher threw down to first base and threw it in the line. The ball hit the runner in the most recent game, and the runner ran through Max Muncy's left arm and just stretched it all the way back, caused a problem where they're saying it's an undisclosed elbow injury. You don't usually come at, you need your elbows to swing the bat. I'll just tell you that. So even if he comes back, I don't know if he's going to be 100%. The reason he's important is he's a left-handed bat in the middle of your lineup, which, against a right-handed pitcher like Adam Wainwright, the Cardinals are throwing out there, a left-handed batter is always going to do better against a right-handed pitcher. So to not have that bat in the middle of the lineup means you're throwing up a lot of right-handers. It might work to Adam Wainwright's advantage. These are the tiny things that Jay was talking about that, it could go the other way if that were to happen. It could go the Cardinals' way if things like this happen.
But let's say they do win. The Dodgers do win tomorrow night. Then they'll face the Giants, right, in a 5-game series?
Yeah, they'll face the Giants. And the Giants, always the thorn in the Dodgers side. Let's talk about this on a larger philosophical level. So if the Dodgers have been in the World Series 3 times in the last 4 years, if they make it to the World Series this year, that's 4 and 5. They've only won once on that weird COVID season where there were only 60 games. And you look at the Giants around 2010, they went to the World Series every other year for like a 6-year or 5-year span, and they won it every other year. So they won 3 World Series in that time. And so, again, it's San Francisco, it's Los Angeles, their biggest rival. They get to lord it over the Dodgers. So the fact that they kind of came out of nowhere this year, and Jay described it earlier, with players who are good, not unbelievably good, everybody had their best year possible. And, the Giants pulled it out. They stayed great the entire year, won 107 games. So it hurts extra that it's the Giants.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to football. Last night, the Chargers beat the Raiders. It was really weird because there was all that lightning and the game was delayed by, about a half hour or so. And maybe even weirder, the Chargers are actually good this season.
Chargers are great.
Why are they so good?
They have a great quarterback. Jay, you can explain it.
Yeah, so they have a great young quarterback, Justin Herbert. He's from Oregon. He played his college ball in Oregon. He's in his second year in the league. He is a great quarterback and the future of the Chargers. And so Chargers fans should be very excited. They're 3-1 right now. He's a big guy. He's 6'6", but he's mobile. He can make all the passes. For so long, the Chargers had a good quarterback in Phillip Rivers. He was a quarterback who kind of got them to the playoffs but couldn't get them over the hump. This guy, Justin Herbert, is the kind of guy who could take them to the Super Bowl. He's that good. And so there's a lot of excitement. And, in the same way, in a sort of a different way, the Rams have gotten a better quarterback in the fold this year in picking up an older quarterback from Detroit. They got Matt Stafford, a guy who did amazing things for a terrible team in Detroit, is now finally with a good team and a good system. And you're kind of seeing how much the Rams needed a better quarterback to advance their team as well. Although the Rams have a very tough division to play in. They have to play in the same division with the Arizona Cardinals, who are incredible. I think the Chargers might have an easier path through their division.
I'm not sure, Jay, because the AFC West is pretty tough too. You've got Denver that's 3-1, Las Vegas is 3-1, the Chargers are 3-1. You've got these are all, they're both in 2 great divisions. Again, you were talking about the Rams, they're in with Seattle, who won yesterday, a tough game. San Francisco, always tough, and then Arizona is 4-0. Arizona beat the Rams yesterday. So, both teams are have very promising seasons, but they're in difficult divisions.
All right, we're going to end it there with the Sklar brothers, who are in a Hall of Fame somewhere. Randy and Jason.
Parkway North. There you go.
Yay! All right. Thanks, you guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for us today on Press Play. I'm Madeline Brand. I'll see you tomorrow.